19. He didn't rush in. The man had a gun, and Rodin had no idea what was behind the door. Instead, he opened it carefully, keeping behind the sheet of metal. He waited for a shot to ring out, but none came. When the door was fully open, he held it with his foot and pulled out his screen. He held it towards the gap, angling it as he did so, catching the reflection. Inside was a short corridor ending in a flight of stairs. There was light, possibly from a window higher up. The stairs turned back on themselves. If Sporif was waiting at the top of them, Rodin would be at a distinct disadvantage. Turning his attention to the outside of the building, Rodin glanced up. There was a window directly above the door. It was open a crack, as if someone had left it on a latch. And where there was a gap, there was a way in. Rodin looked down. There was rubbish everywhere, and Rodin saw what he needed to use. A bag lay on the floor, and it looked heavy enough. He reached a foot out, dragging it closer, and used it to prop the door open. He stowed his screen and took a step back. It would be a simple move. He stepped forward and lunged, grabbed the top of the door and propelled himself higher. He lifted one hand and grasped the window ledge, and held tight as his feet found the edge of the door supporting his weight. Slowly, carefully, he inched his face closer to the window. Beyond was a small room, some kind of cleaning store. Rodin saw brushes and mops and a shelf with various bottles. And a closed door. Rodin worked his fingers through the crack in the window, lifting the latch. It only took a minute, and he was in the room. Then he moved across to the door, holding the handle firmly as he twisted. He felt the door give. Unlocked. Alert for any sound, he eased the door free from its frame, ready for a gunshot. He waited for the sounds of someone moving. The door was open about a hand width. It was enough for Rodin to glance through and see an empty corridor. He was tempted to open the door further, but his inner voice called for caution. It told him that something was waiting on the other side of the door. And Rodin trusted it. This wasn't simple fear. It had picked up on a sound that Rodin had barely heard, or a shift in the light that he had not consciously noticed. He reached into a pocket, drawing out a small eye no bigger than a thumbnail. A thread of a wire emerged from the back. He fitted this into his pocket screen, then inched the eye through the gap, watching the image on the screen. He saw the corridor. Grey walls, bare concrete. Strip lighting above, one flickering in the distance. Rodin rolled the eye around with a couple of fingers, and the image shifted. A door further down, closer. Then the stairs. He continued round. Looking carefully over the banister was Sporif. He had his gun in one hand and was aiming at the stairs below, his back to Rodin. Rodin took everything in. He saw how Sporif held himself, where his weight was supported. He noticed the way one hand held the banister while the other held the gun with a firm, controlled grip. He contemplated the door, and the distance across to the man. He mentally ran through all the tools and weapons he had at his disposal. He thought about what he wanted to do, and what he needed to do. And in a couple of breaths he had his plan. He stowed the screen and eye, shifting his weight. Every move must be perfect. He had a blade in one hand, the door handle in the other. One foot was already coming forwards. He pushed. The door flew open. Rodin moved. The blade left his hand. Sporif was already turning when the metal plowed into his leg, just behind the knee. He stumbled. It was enough. Rodin was on him, pushing him to the ground, a boot pounding onto the right hand, the grip loosening to release the gun. Rodin kicked it down the corridor, but took note of where it ended up. And only then did Sporif cry out. The man's hand was mangled. He brought it into his chest as Rodin stepped back, a blade in one hand, his lance in the other. There was fear in Sporif's eyes, but also determination. As much as Rodin looked down on him, the man was a fighter in his own way. He had taken out some of the names on the list personally. He would not give in easily. Even now, Rodin knew, he was looking for a way out. There would be none. But let him keep a little hope. You really expected that to work? Sporif's mouth opened and closed a couple of times before he answered.
I thought it might, I had to try.
Why? A snort of a laugh.
Someone invades my home, I want them to pay.
He was playing at being tough. Even though the word sounded forced, he wasn't pleading. A part of Road In was impressed. Then he remembered the thugs in the alley. He remembered how Sporif had let them attack him first, had ordered them to attack. He had not said anything, but they were working for Sporif. He had hired them for a reason. And 4 of them were now dead. Dead because they followed someone like Sporif. And what about your thugs?
I paid them well.
Paid them or promised them money? I suppose it was half before, half on completion. Rodin saw the cutthroats in his mind, felt again the warm blood on his face. I suppose you've saved some money now, though.
They were hired. Just like you. Substandard. They screwed up. But at least they tried to do what they were hired for.
Rodin wondered where this was going. The man was bleeding and in pain. He was still clutching his twisted hand to his chest, and had made no move for any weapons. The part of Rodin that was watching, alert to his surroundings, was detecting nothing. Maybe Sporif simply thought that the longer he talked, the longer he lived. A fairly accurate assumption. I'm working on the contract.
By breaking into my rooms?
I needed information on Ratch.
You could have asked.
Malice could have told me everything he knew. He didn't. You wouldn't have talked. Not about everything.
Everything?
And Rodin thought of the final pieces of the puzzle. Blood and Handyman. 2 more clients. But 2 that were not on the list of targets. Sporif's face, already pale, turned almost white. He must have known Rodin would figure it out. That was what the attack was all about. Self-defense. Sporif and Malice had been clients of Ephraim's. The old man was wanting all her clients removed. But Malice was not going to put himself in danger, was he? And his friend, associate, or whatever, needed to be protected too. So what if 2 of Ephraim's clients escaped the old man's vengeance? As long as he didn't know about them, he would still think the job completed. He would still have his closure. But by working this out, Rodin had information that could upset too much. Whatever Malice and Sporif were working on, they needed the old man's money. And for that, they needed him on side. If he were to find out about their involvement with his daughter, would the old man once more turn his back on his son? Rodin ran through the list in his mind. Initially, only Blood was a client. But then he had clearly invited his associate along, and E was listed as meeting both Blood and Handyman. Same time. Threesome, or one after the other. Was this a way of Malice cementing something with Sporif? Was he looking to gain a hold over the man? Rodin didn't know, and nor did he care. The man had been paying for sex with his sister. That thought should have done something to Rodin. But he rationalized it. Malice and Ephraim shared the same father, but from the way Malice never referred to the girl as his sister, Rodin suspected they had different mothers. Malice would not have seen her as a sister. He might not even have known of her existence while growing up. And Rodin reminded himself, Malice was only looking after himself. He didn't care about others. He had used Ephraim, and he was using their father. Just as he was using Sporif.
Malice's father doesn't need to know.
Was that the start of the pleading? Did he need to know about all the others?
It needed to be a full list. He needed to know he was getting his vengeance.
A thought came to Rodin. Why not make up a list? There must be people you and Malice wanted out of the way. Why not simply give him a list of your enemies?
That simple? No. It needed to be mainly accurate. If anyone started digging, it needed to look good.
Does it look good now? Rodin had a blade in his hand, and he saw his hand dip, the metal tip touching Sporif's forehead. Not somewhere he'd usually aim for. Not at this range. But it had the effect he wanted. Sporif's eyes widened. There was an aroma rising, and Rodin knew fear had reached the man's bladder. He didn't need to look down. Rodin wanted to leave. He didn't want to see this sad excuse for a person any longer. Whether Sporif had initially gone with Ephraim through choice or through persuasion from malice, he would have done so with eyes open. He would see it as a way of gaining something, and not simply a brief moment of pleasure. Rodin understood what he gained. Power over malice. A secret the old man's son would not want others to learn. Family was important, even amongst the dregs of society. Some of the low-life scum Rodin had come up against would abuse and kill random strangers without flinching, but if someone were to utter a bad word against a sibling, they would speak no more. If a disparaging word was heard against their mother, they would respond with fatal intensity. The thought of paying for sex with a family member was, to these kind of people, and to the majority of the population, simply wrong. If you want sex or that kind of company, pay someone else. But not a sibling. Not your own flesh and blood. If word got out that Malice had done just this, he would find an awful lot of doors shut to him. It was unlikely that his life would be in danger, but business would be hard. And Sporif would use this if he had to. If Malice started asking for more than was fair, or if he started playing Sporif behind his back, then Malice would receive a threat. Sporif would use his knowledge to keep himself safe. Everyone using everyone else. All those clients, using the paid companions, thinking their money gave them the right to do whatever they wanted. The thugs in the alley, paid for by Sporif as protection, a barrier between himself and anyone who would harm him. Paid for and used so that he was not harmed. And Sporif didn't care. What did it matter if they died? His only concern was the money he had already paid them. He had bought something that was substandard, his own words. Money wasted. And Rodin himself. Being used. Paid to go after others on the whim of his clients. Paid by the old man to remove those who had spent time with his daughter. Paid through the son, who was doing this in order to gain a hold over his father. Sporif a helping hand. He turned up and offered his services, again for money. Or for whatever he could get out of it. He wasn't helping. It was business. Everyone was an object to be used. The end justified the means. Rodin realized there was a tremor in his hand. The tip of the blade was pressing down, and he saw a red drop building and then running to the man's hairline. He looked down at the man. A crimson shirt under the cradled hand. A dark patch at the front of his trousers. And more blood beneath the leg, the blade still protruding. Rodin placed his lance back in his jacket and reached down, grabbing the blade's handle. It was slightly sticky, but already the blood had cooled. He pulled, felt the man jerk, saw more blood flow. The man was rubbish. He was detritus. A bag of bones and flesh, his blood and piss spreading over the floor, staining everything around him. Rodin stood up straight. What kind of a man was this? He'd used others his whole life. Nothing but a leech, sucking on all around him. Nothing but a virus. Rodin brought his boot down hard, forcing both of the man's hands deep into his chest. He felt the body double up, and heard a loud groan. Something splashed against his leg. Not blood this time. Something else spewing up, thrown out of the man's mouth. More mess. Something else to soil his surroundings. Rodin kicked, watching the body twitch. The legs came up, drawing in as if that would help. He kicked again, aiming for the spine. This time the scream was high-pitched, animalistic. Somewhere in the wailing was a crack. The legs jerked violently. Rodin saw a darker patch at the back of the trousers. No control. Wherever he went he would leave his stench. Rodin stepped over the body, nudging it with his foot. The eyes were wide. The face was contorted, teeth hard together, as if that could push the pain away. Rodin bent down, a blade in his hand, the sharp end pointing up. He pummeled down, the handle of the blade connecting with the mouth. He pushed in, forcing teeth to splinter and shatter. And Rodin couldn't stop. He stood once more, letting his eyes travel over the whole body. The legs were still jerking, as if they were trying to run. The arms flailed wildly, occasionally bashing harmlessly against his leg. The stomach was sunken under a red top. Breath came ragged, rattling. Eyes closing slowly. A virus. His very presence staining the world. A dark mass, sucking others in. Rodin raised his leg and aimed. His boot slammed into the face. He held the banister for support. Raised his boot, hammered it down again. A third time. A fourth. He lost count. When he was able to see, the face was unrecognizable. The head was ripped apart, spread over the ground. A pancake of bone, brain and blood. No features. Inhuman. The rest of the body was still. Rodin knew in that moment what he had done. He felt sick. He was a professional. Engage the target, remove with the utmost efficiency. Always a clean removal. This wasn't a removal. This wasn't self-defense. The moment the man had fallen with the blade in his leg, Rodin had control. All it would have taken was a blade across the throat. And Rodin would have left a corpse behind. Not these remains. Not this savaged body. This was not how a man killed. This was the actions of an animal. And like an animal, Rodin had to flee the scene. He started running.